These lies casting Black Lives Matter as violent have already done real damage. One of our colleagues said last week about the events of January 6th was felt by many to be racist and hurtful, a stain on the office he is so fortunate to hold. Look, I get no one likes to be called racist, but sometimes there's just no other way to describe the use of bigoted tropes that for generations have threatened Black lives by stoking white fear of African Americans and Black men in particular. On a radio show, our colleague explained that he never feared for his safety during the January 6th insurrection of the U.S. Capitol. But make no mistake, under different circumstances, he would have been afraid.
Had the tables been turned and President Trump won the election, and those were tens of thousands of Black Lives Matter and Antifa protesters, I might have been a little concerned.
Is that not racism, Mr. President? And I don't think the senator is ignorant of the fact that for centuries in this country, white supremacy has thrived on using fear to justify oppression, discrimination, and violence against people of color. I do, however, think my colleague may be ignorant of the pain caused by his comments and unaware of how they compound the trauma that so many still feel in the wake of the events of January 6th. And because I do not think I can do justice to that pain, I want to share with you an email I received this weekend. It's from one of the most devoted public servants I have ever had the pleasure of working with, an African American member of my staff. I would not normally send you an email like this, but I am at a loss of how to express the outrage and hurt I am feeling by the comments made by Senator Johnson that he would have been more afraid on January 6th if the insurrectionists would have been from Black Lives Matter. I am blessed to be a member on your staff and have had the opportunity to serve as a staff member in the New Jersey delegation for 34 years, but this is the most painful thing I have ever heard being said by a U.S. Senator. I could not imagine that the horrible and painful events from January 6th could be replicated in a statement from a sitting member of the Senate. These comments is worse than the image of the insurrectionist walking through the Capitol building with a Confederate flag. He is perpetrating the racist trope that the country should fear Black people. I have experienced what it's like to have a taxi cab pass you by in order to pick up white passengers who are further down the block of where you're standing. Nothing can describe the feeling when you have entered a store and having store clerks watch your every step while shopping. Sandy, that's his wife, and I have had conversations with our sons when they were young about how to enter a store, not look suspicious, keep your hands out of your pockets until you make your purchase, or how to respond and talk to police officers in any interaction. I've had the difficult conversation of explaining to a young Black scouter in our scout troop why a white campground store clerk accused him of not paying for an item because he was Black. This type of hate speech is not new. The hardest part of what he said is that in 2021, a United States Senator would so freely express this type of hate out loud. I'm so grateful for our officers who endured so many injuries on January 6th, and I pray that they will recover physically and mentally. They are going through so much right now. I feel guilty that my email to you might sound shallow because of the pain that they are trying to overcome. I understand the Senate works best when both sides can find common ground. But how do you really reach common ground when such views can be held? Again, I'm sorry for reaching out late on Saturday evening, but I needed to share this with you. Keith. Mr. President, to read these pained words both broke my heart and boiled my blood. Thousands of people of color serve in the United States Capitol workforce. There are legislative staffers like Keith and Capitol police officers and maintenance workers, cafeteria staff, and so much more. I should not have to stand here and remind anyone that many of them feared for their lives on January 6th. But not Senator Johnson. He felt no fear.
I knew those are people that love this country, that truly respect law enforcement, would never do anything to break a law, and so I wasn't concerned.
Mr. President, people who love this country do not desecrate our most sacred democratic institutions and display symbols of racial hatred like the Confederate flag in the halls of Congress. People who respect law enforcement do not assault Capitol Police officers, beat them within inches of their death, and hurl ugly epithets like officers of color. People who would never do anything to break the law, would not try to overturn the rule of law, plot to kill elected officials, and stop the peaceful transfer of powers instructed by the Constitution of the United States. Now, I know what some right-wing media pundits and some of my Republican colleagues will say. They say it every time that they are asked to accept some responsibility for perpetuating the lies told by President Trump that inspired the violent events of January 6th. They say, what about Black Lives Matter? They say, well, what about it? Well, I say, well, what about it? The violent picture they paint of this movement could not be more divorced from reality. At this point, several reputable studies have confirmed that the protests launched in the wake of George Floyd's chilling murder were overwhelmingly peaceful. I repeat, the Black Lives Matter movement is overwhelmingly peaceful. I know many people don't care about facts these days, but it is the truth. One study out of Harvard University analyzed 7,305 Black Lives Matter protests. The conclusion? Allow me to quote Professor Erica Chenoweth. She said, quote, only 3.7% of the protests involved property damage or some form of vandalism. Some portion of these involved neither police nor protesters, but people engaging in vandalism or looting alongside the protests. In short, our data suggests that 96.3% of events involved no property damage or police injuries, and in 97.7% of events, no injuries were reported among participants, bystanders, or police. Likewise, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, an organization I might add is partially funded by the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, examines 7,750 different Black Lives Matter demonstrations across the nation last summer. They found just 3% of those protests associated with any violence or property destruction whatsoever. They also concluded that police departments, quote, disproportionately use force while intervening in demonstrations associated with the Black Lives Matter movement relative to other types of demonstrations. Indeed, on January 6th, as we waited for hours for backup from the National Guard and other law enforcement agencies to come to the aid of Congress, I know that I'm not the only one who could not help but think of the violent government-sanctioned crackdowns that met Black Lives Matter's protests last summer. The bottom line is that these lies casting Black Lives Matter as violent have already done real damage. They have convinced millions of Americans that they should fear those who march under the banner of this movement for justice, when really it is the resurgence of violent white supremacy that should be Americans' real cause for alarm. Indeed, last October, the Department of Homeland Security issued a report confirming that white supremacists pose the most lethal domestic terror threat to the American people. And research from the Center for Strategic and International Studies finds that white supremacists and their sympathizers carried out 2/3 of terrorist plots and attacks in 2020. In the weeks since January 6th, we have learned that far-right extremist groups that regularly preach white supremacy, such as the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, played a major role in plotting and executing the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Everybody in this body should know that when you perpetuate such racist tropes, you contribute to a culture that gives people permission to treat Black Americans as suspicious and their lives as expendable. We in the United States Senate are supposed to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We're supposed to advance America's long march towards a more perfect union, not coddle and cater to those who would take us backwards. And we are supposed to stand up for the truth. And that's what brought me to the floor today.